If you are listening to these words, I know you want to perform better, get better results, succeed, and thrive. You want this for your team and your organization, but you need it for yourself too. You are the focus today. Let's talk about winning your inside game so you can thrive as a leader and a human being. Welcome to the Remarkable Leadership Podcast, where we are helping leaders grow personally and professionally to lead more effectively and make a bigger difference for their teams, organizations, and the world. If you are listening to this podcast in the future, you could join us for live episodes on your favorite social channel. I guess depending on what your favorite social channel is, you can get information about when those lives happen and get connected and even ask questions during the shows by joining our Facebook or LinkedIn groups, two of those platforms that these will be housed on. And you can do that by going to remarkablepodcast.com/Facebook and remarkablepodcast.com/LinkedIn. Today's episode is brought to you by my latest book, Flexible Leadership, Navigate Uncertainty and Lead with Confidence. It's time to realize that styles can get in our way and that following our strengths might not always be the best approach. In a world that is more complex and uncertain than ever, leaders need a new perspective and a new set of tools to help them achieve the great results their organizations and team members want and need. And that's what Flexible Leadership provides you. You can learn more and get your copy by going to remarkablepodcast.com/flexible. And with that, let me bring in my guest. His name is Steve Magness. There he is. And let me introduce him, and then we will dive in. Steve Magness is a world-renowned expert on performance and a best-selling author of Do Hard Things and the Science of Running. He is also the co-author of Peak Performance and the Passion Paradox. His newest book, Win the Inside Game, How to Move from Surviving to Thriving and Free Yourself Up to Perform, is the focus of our conversation today. He is the co-host of the podcast Farewell and the co-founder of The Growth Equation. He has written for The Atlantic, Runner's World, and Sports Illustrated. He's been featured in The New Yorker, The Wall Street Journal, The New York Times, NPR, and others. He has served as a performance coach and speaker for teams and individuals in Major League Baseball, the NFL, the NBA, the NHL, the military, and lots more. He lives outside of Houston, Texas, and he's our guest. Steve, welcome.
Oh, thanks so much. I'm glad to be here, Kevin.
All right. So I told you before we went live that I love your book. Tell me a little bit about your story. You have an interesting backstory, and we don't have time or desire to do all of that, but tell us a little bit about what leads you to this book and why this book. There, I'm back.
There we go. All right. I can see you, Kevin. So, I mean, the long story short is my background is in running. I was a very good high school runner, ran a 4-minute and 1-second mile way back in high school. And, thought that was the ticket. But then I never, ever improved. And then I got into coaching. Long story short, you can read about it in the book, but went through a really tough coaching period where I essentially witnessed some people, doing some unethical things and cheating at the highest level. And all of that experience brought me to a point where I was like, well, what does it mean to strive for something? What does it mean to obtain success? I've seen a path where in my own career, I thought the only answer was like, be obsessed, forget everything else, make it my sole identity and go for it. And all that led me to is burnout. And then I saw in my early coaching career, I saw someone having kind of like a win at all costs model of, if you want to succeed, it's got to be win at all costs. That means literally doing anything to get that accolade, achievement, medal, whatever it is. And I've always struggled with that because that's not how I saw success or striving in a healthy way. So I really wanted to explore what it means to not only, perform at a high level, but to look at how can we do it in a manner that doesn't make us miserable, that doesn't lead us to doing nefarious things, that allows us to feel good about, the things that we're doing in our work life.
So all of this work, this book, and in that conversation leads us to think that this book is going to be about thriving, which of course is in the subtitle of the book. And yet the whole opening of the book, and I think an incredibly wonderful part of the book, is all about survival mode. And you make the point, and I'd like you to share some of it with us, that an awful lot of us are in survival mode most of the time. And I think what will make this most interesting is for you to tell us more about what you mean by that, because I think that all of us recognize, survival in sort of the jungle kind of mode, or in the movie kind of mode. But you make the point that we're there a lot more than we might realize psychologically. So let's talk about that first. I think it's really important. And everybody, as Steve talks about this, I'd like you to think about this both for yourself, but also with your leader hat on. And I'm not asking you to judge others, but I think that as you listen, you'll get some sense of how this is valuable and thinking about where others are too.
Yeah, absolutely. So if we look at, let's start at the jungle, right? So if we were in the jungle surviving and we were under a real threat, we'd have a stress response. And that stress response would put us in a place where we would essentially have short term thinking on, oh my gosh, how do I survive this situation? Like there's a lion, a tiger, we're running out of food, whatever it is. Forget the future, forget the long term, like what gets me through this next moment, right? It's that fight or flight moment. And what we know is when we're in that spot, yeah, it might help us, escape the lion, but
Short term.
yeah, no, short term, but it's really damaging over the long haul. Now let's zoom out and take that to our modern world. A lot of us are in a state where we're so focused on the short term, where it feels like, okay, everything is overwhelming. There's too much information, there's too much overload. I don't know what to do about anything. So I'm just going to tackle the next problem in front of me. And what happens is we get stuck in this kind of survival mode where instead of thinking about the future, instead of being able to zoom out, instead of thinking, what is the impact of this? We just get caught up in like, how do I get through this thing? And to make it clear for folks is when we live in this kind of survival mode for too long, we end up doing things like avoiding the hard thing right now that gives us lasting growth. We do things like rationalize and justify decisions instead of working through them and saying, where's the truth? Where's the thing that will help me, get through this? Essentially, the case that I make is it's almost like we're back in middle school, right? Where we're looking around and we're like, I'm really anxious. I don't quite know where I fit in. I don't quite know where my direction is going. I don't know what to do. And because of that, we get in that survival short term mode. And instead, I make the argument that what we need to do is like, get out of that, zoom out, get some perspective, and also fulfill ourselves so that we can have that security that allows us to do so over the long haul.
So you hinted at a couple of those things that we do. You call them the protective systems in the book, right? And you said, well, sometimes we want to avoid it. Sometimes we try to defend ourselves. Sometimes we try to narrow our focus. We don't stay broad, we go narrow. And then there's one other one that's actually far more helpful than the first three. And that's called accepting and thinking about how do I grow from this point. Why is it that we lean on the first three and not the fourth most of the time?
The simple answer is your brain is designed as a uncertainty reducing machine. So when we're in those moments, what is stress? It's uncertainty. I don't know how this is going to, work out. I'm not sure what path to go. And the simplest route is those first three, which if we want to reduce uncertainty, what's the best way? We avoid the thing. Well, let's just get it out right now, right? Or we, go into that defensive mode. I'm going to deny the reality of the problem
Ostrich
that
mode, right?
exists. Yeah. Stick your head in the sand. That's what it is. The last one really sucks in the short term, and it doesn't reduce uncertainty in the short time because you're essentially saying, it's a really stressful time. I don't have the answer. I'm not quite sure what the path forward is, but I need to accept that and then figure out how do we transform this into learning and growth. Over the long haul, it's more beneficial, but in the short term, it doesn't eliminate that stress. And often we're in this survival mode. Our brain, all it cares about is like, how do we reduce this stress right now? How do we get rid of this discomfort? I don't like how it feels. Like, just get rid of it, forget the long-term consequences.
And I agree. And I mentioned to you before we went live that I see all sorts of parallels, and some of the stuff that you're writing about is extremely connected to my new book, Flexible Leadership. And this is one of those places, because I love your line, uncertain, our brains are uncertainty reducing machines. I think that's right. And yet there's uncertainty all around us. And as leaders, we can't be the ostrich. And too often we end up defending or justifying our natural response. And I'm suggesting, and you're suggesting, that we have to move past our natural response. That fourth thing, that accept, learn, grow, integrate idea, is where we can move past, where we can move past our natural response, which is to do one of those first three things, or to lean into our identity, which says, well, this is just the way I am.
Yeah,
This is just the way I lead, right?
you're spot on. And I think this is why it's so important to leadership. Because think about it. We all know we have this natural response. Think about when something went wrong, or where you messed up, or when you chose
I
the
don't have to
wrong
think very
position.
far back for
Right.
that, Steve. Like probably this morning.
Right, exactly. We all experience this, especially in leadership, but also in life. And what's the natural response? I'll give you a better example here is this. How many of times have you got in an argument with your significant other or spouse? And what you're doing is you're defending the argument instead of listening and understanding, like, oh gosh, this is a simple solution, but we can't get past that initial response, which is, this is a threat to me. You're attacking something that I did. So we're going to go back and forth on this. When the reality is you're both on the same team trying to figure it out. And if you realize that, you'd be like, okay, let's rationally get through this, move past it, and then say, what is the learning and growing, so that we can, we don't have to face the same challenge beforehand. But that's not our natural response. Our natural response is, no, I'm in the right, you're in the wrong, even though we're staring at the person we love the most in the world.
And they are not a lion or a tiger, and
Right.
you're in the grocery store, not the jungle. So like
Right.
there's a totally different thing going on here. And yet the way we're wired at some level, right? And that's why I think this opening part is so important. It's as writers, you and I appreciate this, move from thriving to surviving. It sounds good and it's true. Don't misunderstand me. And yet we throw that word surviving around a lot. And the point that you're making, and you make in the book so well, is that we treat a lot of stuff like surviving that we don't need to. If we would take a deep breath and step back and think about it, we can get out of these first three protective systems. You use a phrase in the book a couple of different places, and it really struck me. And so I'm curious what you mean, or say a little bit more about this idea that we tend to flatten our world. What do you mean?
So here's what our brain tends to do is we need to make sense of the world that we live in, because our brain is essentially it's predictive. Meaning, as we go through the world, we look around and our brain is like, how do I handle this next challenge? What's this next thing coming on? I'm about to get on stage and have to give my pitch. Like, well, do I need anxiety? Do I need nerves? Do I need excitement? How am I going to handle this psychologically and biologically? And what I mean by flatten is, because of our predictive kind of brain, the easiest, simplest way to make sense of the world is to flatten it, to turn us into like 2D caricatures. And what I mean is, you can probably think of situations where you do this, where you have people in your workplace who you essentially categorize by their job or what they do or some simple characteristic. You're
We
like,
got all kinds of ways we do that.
yeah, you're like, that's Jill, she's the accountant, or that's Joe, he's very neurotic. Whatever it is, we just flatten people into simple labels that help us categorize that. And we don't just do it to other people, we also do it to ourselves, right? We define ourselves by a few simple characteristics. And that helps us kind of process in our brain, be like, okay, when I enter a situation with Joe, I know that he is like very meticulous. So this is how I'm going to treat him. And that to a degree like helps. But if we live in that flattened world, what happens is pretty simple, is that we become kind of fragile both in our leadership style and our sense of self. Because if we don't realize and recognize the complexity of the human sitting across from us, then A, that means that we're not going to be connected with them. Because one of the big things on connection and belonging is that you get this like vulnerability and trust cycle, which occurs because someone realizes that, hey, Kevin sees me as more than an accountant. Like he sees me as a human being. And when you get that, you say, okay, I'm going to buy into whatever Kevin's saying because
Yep.
like I know he's got my back. And on the other side of this is that even with ourselves, right? If we see ourselves and flatten ourselves as like, I am Steve and I am a runner, and that is only what I'm defined as, then what happens is if running or your job, if you're the CEO or leader or manager, if that's all you have, then the moment that that starts to go poorly, let's say you get a poor job review, then all of a sudden it feels like it's the end of the world because you flatten yourself where you don't see all the many shades of gray and other things that you do and are interested in and diversified sources of meaning that you have. So flattening makes us fragile.
So we're talking about our identity, everyone. One of the things that you say later in the book that I thought was the way you said it, I thought was really interesting. You said, we all die once, athletes die twice. And you said it in the context of professional athletes, right? That when their career ends, they have almost assuredly defined themselves as a player of that sport, right? And when that is no longer there, then what happens? And we've all heard, whether you're a sports fan or not, we've heard some of the 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 sad stories about how that ends. We also have examples of where there's good stories, but that's because they were able to manage and think about this identity piece a little bit more. And everything you're saying about flattening ourselves and the way we flatten others is so important. And as it relates to how we flatten ourselves, we call ourselves, we're an accountant, we're we're a leader, we're whatever, and we don't think about maybe the best chapter title I will see all year, which is accept the messiness of who you are. So I want us to talk about accepting the messiness, because as humans, we are without question messy, which means we can't define ourselves by one word, one phrase, one personality style, one leadership style, whatever, one generation, however you want to put that. So why is it so important if we want to move towards thriving, that we accept our messiness? And then perhaps even how, Steve, can we help others accept theirs?
Yeah, it's important because, as I said, when we flatten ourselves, we make ourselves fragile. When we accept the messiness, we become resilient. And it's very simple. The reason is this is because if you accept the complexity of the person that you are and the interests you have, the strengths you have, and even the weaknesses or the flaws or the drawbacks or whatever it is, the things you struggle with, if you accept that, then your brain goes, okay, like I get it. This is part of who I am. A, that allows me to work on the thing. If I say, hey, this is a weakness, I want to get better at this. If I've accepted, I can work on it. And B is if for whatever reason, if that shows up, you're like, okay, yes, this is part of me and I can navigate it. If you don't, if you go with that, we'll call that Instagram version of yourself, where you show everybody the highlights, you paint the best picture, you say, I'm always happy, fit, fun, and at my best. Well, what happens is reality is going to smack you in the face at some point. And if you fed your brain the information that I'm the best, I always figure it out. I'm always, A, B, and C. Then when reality smacks you in the face, your brain is going to go like, "Hey, wait a minute. Like this isn't what we thought was coming. This isn't what who we thought we were." And because of that, your brain is going to default to that avoidance and protect mode
Yep.
because it's saying like this isn't what we signed up for. The example I like to give in sports, which I think really highlights this, is if I sign up for a marathon, and even as a runner, I say, hey, this is going to be really freaking tough because there's no balance about it. It's always tough, right? No matter how much you train, it's always tough. And you say, this is the reality. This is what I bring to the table, right? This is approximately maybe what I think I can accomplish. If you do that, then even when it gets tough, your brain's going to go like, yeah, I expected it to get to tough, but we're prepared for it. If
Mhm.
instead I went with the Instagram version and said, Steve, you're a lifelong runner. This is no problem. Like you've been in situations like this before all the time. Like you're going to handle this with a breeze. The minute you get to whatever, mile 18, 19, 20, and reality smacks you in your face, your brain is going to go, I didn't sign up for this. This is not what you told me that, was coming. And I'm going to try and convince you to quit, which is that protect mode, because like we didn't sign up for it. It's the same with our identities, right? If we flatten it instead of accept the messiness, we set ourselves up for that fragility and that avoidance and that protection.
And from a leadership perspective, we set ourselves up to say, well, listen, you just have to accept this is how I lead. So we go into defend. The other thing you talk about, we go into defending, justifying, and all that stuff. Well, and then we also everybody can start blaming others for the things that happen, as opposed to saying, well, what part of this is ours? So there's a whole accountability piece here. So I do want to talk about one of the words that gets used in leadership circles a lot, and it relates to all this stuff. We're talking about our identity, we're talking about messiness, we're talking about 2D to 3D, like all that stuff. But where does authenticity fit in here then? Like, what does it mean to be authentic given what we've just described? Because, people want to see more of us than the Instagram image or short or whatever you want to call it. So, what's your take, or what would your research say to us about advice about being more authentic?
So here's what I think matters is that when we talk about authenticity, there's almost like a performative variety. Meaning, I've heard I should be authentic. So I'm gonna, share a story or two here and make people think that like I'm being vulnerable and open and all of that good stuff. And then there's the real variety, which I think is more important, which authenticity is essentially like being who you are in the moment and letting people see that, not just through your words, but also your actions. So if you are the person who, maybe has a little bit of a more hard edge in leadership, like that's okay to a degree. You've just got to like be authentic in that who you are and not like try and sugarcoat it and not try and, fake it through this. And I think that's the key difference there is that authenticity is good as long as it is not the performative variety. And the last thing I'll say is if you look at the psychology research, is that human beings are experts at reading signals. And what I mean by that is we're experts at not only listening to what you're saying, but picking up like your actions, your body language, and seeing if those two match. And I think when we comes to authenticity, this is why it's really important because if I'm saying one thing but my body language, my actions behind it, all of that is pointing in the other direction, our brain will pick it up and be like, there's something off here. I'm not going to quite buy what this person is saying. And I think that right there is the key to authenticity is like, you've got to have everything aligned so that that person on the receiving end getting the signal says like, okay, he's being real. Like I need to listen to this to accept it.
And so, if, for example, I mean, I love that. If I am that leader, I'll just use your example with that more of a hard edge, that doesn't mean we stay there. It doesn't mean we lean into that. It means that if that comes out, it's okay. But if in that moment, if the context of that situation that isn't serving us, then we've got to be able to shift. We may even need to apologize or whatever. But that authenticity isn't an excuse to just do whatever the heck we think is who we are and not try to get better.
Yeah,
That's what I'm trying to.
it's that spot on. It's exactly what you talked about. It's that flexible and adaptable leadership. It's authenticity is seeing the situation for what it is, right? If you have that hard edge and you explode on someone, it's not being like, that's just who I am. I explode on people. It's realizing and seeing
Yeah.
in this situation, this had a negative effect on A, B, and C. And I realized and could see that this is on me for going too far in that direction.
It can be my natural response, but it doesn't have to be my auto response. And I
Yes.
think that's a huge difference. So I could spend our entire conversation times 3 just on this identity and survival stuff. But I want us to at least move to what you mean by thriving. And so I want to ask a couple more questions, Steve, before we finish. So when you say thriving, what does that mean? Because we've mostly been talking about surviving so far. Like, what does it mean? How would you define thriving for us?
Yeah, I think what it is, and if you look at the psychology research, it's defined in it so many different ways. But to me, it looks at you feel like you have autonomy, meaning like you have some say in the direction that you're headed. You feel like you're contributing. There's some significance behind the work that you're doing. And we're talking about thriving in the workplace, or we could talk about sports, but it's the same thing.
Mhm.
There's significance. You're a contributor. It's meaningful. You feel like you belong, meaning there is connection to those around you, and you feel like you're essentially at home, right? You have a spot. And I think when we look at those kind of 3 things, and we could again include things like competency, meaning like you feel like you're making progress towards something meaningful. There's all sorts of variations. But to me, that is it. It's like we want to feel significant, we want to feel directed, we want to feel belonging. And if we have those things, then chances are, and the research backs this up, is we're going to stoke our intrinsic motivation, meaning we're not going to just be motivated by the accolades, achievements, the money, whatever it is, but for the joy of the pursuit, for the challenge of the thing, the task we're taking on. And what we know over the long haul is that intrinsic motivation is a better fuel, and we feel better doing it even when we're going through difficult times, when we
Oh,
have
sure.
that as the backbone.
Far, far more powerful. So you know that the show is called the Remarkable Leadership Podcast, and we've hinted at that a little bit. Is there anything else though that you would say? Because the book isn't everybody. We're talking with Steve Magness, the author of Win the Inside Game, and the book isn't specifically a quote leadership book, right? For us to be highly effective leaders, the better we become as a human, the better we have the chance to become as a leader, which is one of the reasons why I have you here. But is there any specific advice or counsel that you would give us with our leadership hats on, based on the work in this book?
Oh, that's a great question. And I think you nailed the question, which is I think it starts with often leaders almost neglect and ignore themselves. S- Because what happens is you're in the leadership position. You're saying, "Okay, I've got all these people I'm responsible for. I want to help them," which is noble, right? And you see the same thing in teaching, because what are teachers? They're leaders of students, right? And
Mhm.
neglecting it. And because of that, if you look at the data and the research, both in leadership positions, teaching, or other professions like that, the burnout rate is pretty dang high. And what I would argue there is there's stuff on leadership in the book, but I think it starts with understanding that like we've got to take care of our basic psychological like needs to put us in a position where we're in a healthy place, where we're not feeling in that survival mode, where we're feeling like we have that motivation under us, and that we can weather the storm. In the book, I have a chapter on learning how to lose, and I look at it from a sporting context, but it also
Right.
applies to leadership, which is that like the when the you know when the stuff hits the fan and you're kind of like, okay, this didn't go well, how do we bounce back? Like, the more resilient you are, the more you have that secure sense of self and identity, the more you have an understanding where you belong, and where you're defining success in a way that doesn't put you in, as we talked about all the beginning, the win at all costs, but a successful striving that aligns with your values, the better you're able to navigate that situation and the better you're able to lead. So that's how I would kind of see this book, is it gives you the building blocks to make sure that you feel like you're a better human being, which then puts you in a better spot to be able to lead others without feeling the brunt of the stress that you're experiencing.
Yeah, I agree with that. Everybody, I recommend this book highly. I'm having this conversation with Steve in early April. You could be listening to this, watching this anytime. I'm having this conversation in early April, and I read a ton, obviously, for the show and beyond. This is one of the best books I've read so far this year. I love this book. I've loving this conversation, and perhaps we'll figure out a way to have a longer conversation, Steve. But I have a couple of kind of questions before we wrap up, and that I ask everybody, really. And so the first one is, what do you do for fun? Like, I know you still run, or I believe that you still run, but what do you do for fun, Steve?
That's a good question. Right now I have two daughters who are under two, so life is
If you
crazy.
don't think they're fun, you don't have much else that's fun, because that's
Yeah,
the focus.
no, that's the focus. But you know what? I'll say my one daughter is just about to be two. Is she's at such a fun stage, and my wife and I are just like, how can we like integrate her into like activities, because it's like mind blowing where you say this is the first time she's gone to the zoo, and it's so refreshing and so energizing because you get to almost like see things through a child's eyes. So really, for our family, like, that is the fun. We're like, what new things can we do, because it's all new to her, and that's really exciting and fun in our life.
I love that. And what, Steve, are you reading these days?
Oh gosh, I read a ton. But one of the books that I just finished that is actually new that I loved is A Story is a Deal by Will Storr. And it's essentially on the science of storytelling, and how how humans are essentially storytelling machines, and how that impacts not only how we live our lives, but also the stories we tell in leadership positions. He's got a chapter on how that kind of creates the story of, does the company see themselves as the underdog or the favorite? And I think that stuff is so interesting and compelling.
We will have the link not only to that book, but to Steve's book in the show notes. If you missed those because you were listening while you were exercising or driving or whatever, you can get that in the show notes. We hope that you'll do that. Steve, where can we learn more about your work, what you're up to, um, the book? What else?
Yeah, you can check out all my stuff is at stevemagness.com. I'm on all social media at Steve Magness, and the book's available wherever you can buy books nowadays.
Wherever fine books are sold, they used to say, Steve. So now, before we go, and before I say some final things with Steve, I have the question that I ask all of you every episode. And if you've been here before, you know what I'm about to ask. The question is, now what? What action are you going to take as a result of this? What insight did you get today that is useful to you? Not just that's useful, but that you will use. Maybe some of the things that we talked about not flattening ourselves or flattening others too much is useful. Maybe the thoughts about how we think about becoming more adaptable are something you're going to be able to apply. Maybe some of the really tactical things that Steve shared about authenticity would be helpful to you. Maybe you're challenged a little bit about these. Am I being really authentic or just performatively authentic? I don't know what those things are for you, but what I know is that this will have been time much better spent if you take action on your answer to the now what question than if you don't. Steve, Thanks so much for being here. It was such a pleasure to have you. I've been looking forward to it, and it didn't disappoint.
Oh, thanks so much, Kevin. That means so much. And keep doing what you're doing. It's really important.
All right. So everybody, if this was your first time, welcome. If this is your next time, make sure that you have another next time. Make sure you're subscribed to wherever it is that you're watching us so that you can continue to get this information, because every week we're back. And if so, something that we said or that I talked about that would be helpful to you and your organization, you can reach out to us, info@kevineikenberry.com, or any place you can find me. You can ask me a question and let us know how we can help you. So again, thanks for being here. And we'll be back next week with another episode of the Remarkable Leadership Podcast.